afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler coming to you live from, well, not live, recorded from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania studio, WWDNYK Studios. WWDNYK stands for What We Do Not Yet Know. What We Do Not Yet Know. I'm really excited about our next guest. She's kind of a superhero. I mean, people tell me that I'm busy. Dr. Pam Popper. She's a fighter. She's scrappy. She's smart. She's got a lot going for her. She's fighting for your freedom, for my freedom. She's fighting for reality, the same empirical reality that we're all fighting for. She doesn't like the constructivists coming in and telling us the way that it is without any data. We're going to talk about, we'll talk about her Make Americans Free Again. We're going to talk about those initiatives, the lawsuits and the complaints, and see what traction, get a current beat on what's happening there. And she's got this new book called COVID Operation right here. What happened, why it happened, and what's next. And this book is huge. I can't believe she wrote this book in such a short period of time with her co-author, Shane Pryor. So welcome to Unbreaking Science, Dr. Popper.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. Yeah, and I had help writing the book. I mean, I couldn't have done that all by myself. And the other thing too is we were doing a lot of research for our lawsuits anyway. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do all this research, I might as well put it all together in a book that would be easy for people to understand, so they can clearly see what happened here. So people tell me it's like reading a novel.
Well,
And John Grisham has never made up a story this good, like what really happened to us,
no,
right?
it kind of
So
looks like
easy to read.
one of those like a novel. It really does. But in actuality, it's more than just a lot of words, ladies and gentlemen. This is a fact-filled, accurate history of exactly what happened in real time. I mean, I lived it, you lived it. If you're paying attention as close as we do, this is a fantastic, um, holistic. It's got everything in it. Okay, so let's just do this. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. The chapter, the perfect storm, a preview of things to come. Meet some of the key players: the global health and vaccine cabal, a questionable collaboration, China before COVID-19, the COVID-19 timeline, how to invent a pandemic, the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the lockdown, life in COVID land, inflated cases and deaths, the controversy over treatment, consequences, the cure is really worse than the disease, enter George Floyd, which new normal will we choose, reflection on the COVID-19 debacle, our new normal, citizens in charge, and an epilogue, if you can believe it. So this was written in real time, and if you know anything about books, an epilogue is something that you think to put in afterwards, but this is written in real time. So I have to say, I really super recommend this book. We're going to get into that a little bit, but first I want to talk about what we agreed you would come on Breaking Science and give us kind of an update. When you were on Spiro a few months ago, the stuff that you were doing with the lawsuit against a person you called the little dictator, the little criminal, sorry, if you're the little criminal, time and time again, I don't know if you know you're doing that, but you do that. You call him the little criminal. You had a complaint against CDC. You're working with the lawyers. You do monthly conference calls. Tell us what's going on, Pam. How's it going?
Yeah, so you have a lot of experience with what this is we're dealing with right now. It's medical tyranny. You've been fighting it for a long time. I've been fighting it for a long time. And it's been getting worse. And so sooner or later something was going to happen. I never visualized anything like this, but this is what it is. It's medical tyranny. And what I realized was going on, I realized that with something this big, you're going to have to take a different approach than we've been taking in the past to fight similar battles. So that was going to involve lawsuits. It had to involve mobilizing people in a different sort of way to have a much more profound influence over government. And it was going to take a lot of money to make this thing happen also. So that's when I started Make Americans Free Again. And the idea was that we would take care of a whole lot of things at the same time. So I'll just kind of tell you what we did. We started last summer, and one of the first things we did was we started Thursday groups here in Ohio. It's spread all over the country right now. It's going on in Pennsylvania, where you are too. And the Thursday group started, I think I had 5 people at my first Thursday group. Now we have about 70, and there are thousands of Thursday groups, hundreds of them in Ohio. And so what happens, mental health, one of the things they did is they separated us from each other, right? So now we are all together in a room, no masks, humanity, the way we're supposed to be, right? So people getting together, it's good for mental health. The second thing is the more of this that goes on, the easier it is to raise money. Like we did now my group personally did a fundraiser for Valentine's Day. It took $2,000 to pay all the expenses. We had that in 60 seconds. I'm not kidding. We needed 10 people to do the work, 60 more seconds, and then we raised like $8,000 for the attorneys in one night. And we have social events. Our fundraisers are social events. So we're trying to bring normal to the community. We also support local businesses. We have Small Business Rescue, where we support local businesses and spend money there and help make up the deficit. We'll go buy what we have to buy to keep a business open. But the big thing is funding these lawsuits. And a lot of people were pretty demoralized last year because there were a lot of lawsuits filed that didn't go anywhere. But the reason they didn't go anywhere, and we watched carefully while this was happening, is because people would file a lawsuit and say, my constitutional rights are being violated. They were, all right, and they are. But then the government shows up and says, oh, but yes, that's true. They acknowledge it, but we have all this authority under the emergency powers, and then the judges would rule in their favor. So what we decided to do was file lawsuits claiming that there is no emergency. To the root of the problem. There was no emergency. There is no emergency. They knew it, essentially implying that there's fraud involved. And so our little criminal emperor, he was on his high horse on August 31st before we filed. He was setting up isolation camps. That was the subject of his press conference the day we filed. And he let it slip that the feds were going to reimburse you when you set up isolation camps for every day people are there. And he ordered every university, public university and college to set aside space for it. And so we filed, and we never heard any more about the isolation camps. The second round of lockdowns, we were the first state to lock down. We were the model state. No lockdown round two. And we can have gatherings up to 300 people. I mean, it's not great living in Ohio, but if you're living under a criminal emperor like we are, then it's the best place to be out of all of the criminal enterprise states that are going on right now. So that's what's happened here. We filed in Ohio, New Mexico, and against the CDC, HHS. We are getting ready to file in 2 more states, probably this month, and we have a 3rd state after that coming soon. And the goal is to file in every state for a variety of reasons, but we want to do it in every single state. So that's what we've been doing.
So that's fantastic. And you have the data behind you. I mean, you have my favorite quote out of this entire book, I'll just cut right to the chase. The favorite quote in the book, unfortunately, it wasn't written by the authors. You're quoting the FDA. The FDA's online emergency use authorization includes the statement, positive results of the PCR test do not rule out bacterial infection or co-infection with other viruses. The agent detected may not be the definitive cause of disease. That's the FDA. And yet the CDC, of course, and I'm up to my ears in this as well, announced in April, Deborah Birx, said if you died with the virus, then you died from it. And the default diagnosis is if they detect the virus on you, in you, whatever, then you have COVID-19. A molecular test tells you are sick, and that's that we've been over this 100 times. So what kind of traction are you getting? I mean, these are great. The things that you've done are great. What you've done is you've shown them that you've got standing. You've shown the governor, DeWine, that you're not going to, the people are not going to take this stuff laying down. They're not going to take the concentration camps laying down. And the idea of quarantining healthy people during an outbreak is just ridiculous. But you just outlaid the successes. There are successes just through muscle flexing, if you will. But where do we stand? Where do you stand right now in terms of the complaint with the CDC? Where is that?
Well, when you file lawsuits, it's like watching paint dry, It really is because you file and then they get so much time to respond and then you respond and then, okay, so you got all this back and forth going on. One lawsuit I think will withdraw and file again for a lot of reasons. But the key to understanding the strategy is that first of all, when you file, you start winning because you're putting the state on notice that you're watching. And it does cause changes in behavior. That's why we didn't get a second lockdown. And that's why
huge.
And by the way, in New Mexico, the little empress opened up the outdoor dining and she lifted the stay-at-home order. They all want to look reasonable, and even the smaller lawsuits that have been filed around the country that haven't been won in terms of actual victory, like the judge saying you can't do this anymore. There are some lawsuits where somebody files, and then you'll see the governor say, "Well, we're going to open that up anyway." I was actually going to do that, but so I don't know why these people are making a big scene about it in court because I was going to do it anyway. So you win by filing. And then the strategy is, I've always been one of those people. The harder I work, the luckier I get, right? And I came from a sales background before healthcare, and we used to teach people it's all in the numbers. The more people you talk to, the better you be. Well, if we file this in 46, 47 states, we only have to win one time. One time, one judge, someplace in America, says, I'm going to grant a TRO and expedited discovery. And it's all over because I'll tell you what is going on. In both with our federal case and the state cases, it's all about we don't want to show you anything. In other words, if somebody accused you or me of fraud, we would be anxious to prove that we didn't do it.
Of
So I
course.
would show up with all the document, right? So, and our attorney, our lead attorney, actually said one day during a hearing, all this we've spent months, basically because you don't want to give us data. And it seems to me that if you could prove us wrong, you'd want to do that as soon as possible, because think of the press conference the little emperor could have the next day. These people made this big fuss and they accused us of all this stuff, and we didn't do it, and we proved it, and the judge
Right.
said that we were right. I mean, other governors would be sending you thank you notes because they won't have to go through all this. So there's only one reason we can think of that you wouldn't do this, and that is because you don't have the documentation, right? So one judge someplace in the United States, maybe it'll be Ohio, maybe it'll be Missouri. I don't know. I don't really care where it is. The first judge who says, that's it, we're doing it. Okay, so now you get your depositions, you get your documents. The documents are going to be the same everywhere. It's because of where, in every state, where did these people get their marching orders? They got it
That's
from
right.
the feds. They got it from the WHO. They got it from Gates. They got it from these different organizations. So we only have to succeed one time in one place, and then this all comes unraveled. And there's some data. I will tell you this, I can't talk about it much right now because the attorneys will kidnap me and lock me in the basement if I do it. But we have unlocked a treasure trove of data that will absolutely blow your mind when we use it. And in case any of the little criminals are watching this right now, just get ready because you're not going to be having a very good time in a little while. All right. So
I'm very much
the
very much
facts
looking
are on
forward to
our
talking
side.
with you about that offline because I do data analysis for a living. But it's ironic. Let's just say this: that the World Health Organization discovered a false positive problem associated with the CT threshold with the PCR test, just as Joe Biden was being sworn in. It's
Yes. Wasn't that a
terribly
miracle?
it's terribly ironic. Yes, it's a quite a
Yeah.
correlation. Though, what I've been telling people to do is to FOIA their public health departments and their state health departments for they put the demand on them for information of any internal or external discussions about the use of PCR testing for counting cases and reporting cases and for counting deaths and reporting deaths. Because with
Hmm.
FOIA, they have no excuse except for, well, it's an emergency, we're really busy and we're not responding to FOIAs right now. If you get a denied FOIA, then you have standing in a courtroom as well. So
Right.
if there's a
Right.
state that you can't seem to get traction in, if they deny a FOIA and they're hiding information, then you have better standing.
Well,
Um,
we know they're hiding information, and we know that it goes beyond that. It's not just hiding; it's falsifying information. And the reason is that if you take a look, the numbers make no sense at all. All right, you've got South Dakota and Florida definitely haven't gone by the playbook. We have two governors who aren't compromised, right? And so everybody should be dead in South Dakota by now, and that's not the case. And people should have started dropping like flies in Florida when DeSantis opened everything up. Now Texas and Mississippi are open, so we'll see if everybody starts dying in the street and on the sidewalk in Texas. We'll know that there's really something going on. But and one of the things that's going to save us, our country, and I thought about this a lot. When you don't sleep, you have a lot of time to think, right? So in the middle of the night, I had this epiphany. Why? Because I always want to be hopeful. I always want to be positive, and not in an unrealistic, stupid sort of way, but just really looking for positive things out of this. And so I was thinking, why are we not going to end up like Venezuela or Cuba or China? And the reason is, if you take a look at places, this is used for political purposes, let's face it. So if you take a look at places where this kind of thing has been done before, you had a top down government that got replaced by a bad top down government. We have a government of independent, all kinds of independent local governments. So it's like herding cats to a certain extent. And you see this, the federal government right now, in the famous conversation that Joe had with Ron DeSantis, where DeSantis hung up on him. The federal government just can't make people do stuff at the local level. And that is, like you're saying, that is our salvation, is putting pressure on local government. And we've taken that a step further. At Make Americans Free Again, .com, we have a section on the take action part that's called Small Business Rescue, and it talks about the things that we're doing with our Thursday groups that are really great. And then it also talks about it provides some documents that you can give to your local health officials, because according to our attorneys, not only are the governor and the Department of Health executives and those types of people at that level responsible, but that responsibility for taking fraudulent actions also affects people at the lower levels. So we actually have a legal opinion that people can give to the health inspector coming in saying, listen, you seem like a nice person. I don't have a lot of problems with you, but the bottom line is that if this all comes unraveled, it's not just the governor who has to hire his own attorney. It's not just Mr. Fauci, and it's not just their assets that can be seized. This can happen to you too, because in a court of law, I was just doing what I was told is not a defense if there's criminal activity involved. And that's really scaring some people at the local level who are saying, hey, I don't want to be involved in this stuff now that there's a possibility I could get in trouble. I mean, and so I think putting pressure on that local government is something we can do here that is not available in a lot of countries.
Yeah, so the kid gloves are off. It looks like you got some welterweights that are growing up here. So
Yes.
it's good to see. I'm drawn into all these fights all over the country, and my name's dragged through the mud. USA Today, things like that. They go after my expertise, and whether or not
Oh
I'm
yeah, that's how I know you're one of the good guys. If the
right.
mainstream media is bashing you, you must know what you're talking about, or they wouldn't bother, right?
Yeah, and I eat fact checkers for breakfast too. But the the angle that your cases are taking, the complaint and the various cases that you're filing, may well come down to debates over. Well, you mentioned falsification of data. If you have that, that's fantastic. But the debates over things like, okay, let's start at the beginning. Is there an emergency? Yeah, there's an
Mhm.
emergency if you put everybody on ventilators. There's an emergency if you don't provide early treatment, right? If you deny early treatment and you deny people access to treatments like ivermectin that will have up to 88% reduction in mortality. You know, the Fauci paradigm for treating COVID, to go home and stay there for 2 weeks and see if you need to be hospitalized with no treatment. That's a boatload of liability on them. They've created this so-called
Mhm.
emergency. And you're right. I often celebrate the fact that we have, the original 13 colonies became 13 states with 13 different governments, because it's like an experiment. We have 13 different experiments, and now we have 50 different experiments in democracy, in
Mhm.
how to run a government and how not to run a government. So when we make errors, we can steady ourselves. But the debate may well come down to interpreting things like, are they creating reality, or are they actually are they letting reality determine, from data, what's actually happening? And they started right from the beginning, that we just mentioned, with the died from the presence of a viral test. And now everybody knows that the CT score, if you drop the CT score, you're going to see a nosedive in cases. They want to, I would imagine, would love to attribute that nosedive in cases to the vaccine, but they can't. The experts are saying that there's not enough vaccinated. But the kinds of data I'm interested in getting my hands on, there's two types I'm interested in getting my hands on. And these are research studies, so they'd be peer reviewed and published so that they could be cited in cases like yours, I guess, would be week by week, all-cause mortality in the elderly from, say, October 2020 until now. And because we know when the vaccine came online, and we need it from multiple states, we know when the vaccine came online, and if there is an excess in deaths of number of citizens, then we'll see an uptick in the all-cause mortality from elderly citizens. We need we need an age group 50 to 55, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, and so on. Because we have it from past years. If we can compare it to past years, then we can see, and we've done this a number of ways with different data sets, we can apportion how much of it's due to our failed response to coronavirus or our response to coronavirus, and how much is actually due to things like possible respiratory illnesses that were misdiagnosed
Hmm.
and getting it done like that. So I'm very interested in getting week to week. And if anybody out there has access to that, the other thing I want to get data for are clinical records and medical records, IRB approved study, demographics, so that I can create a prediction model to determine who will get serious COVID-19 as opposed to mild COVID-19, independent of testing, and who's likely to
Hmm.
die from COVID-19. And I have a whole list of variables that I want to mine out of medical data sets. And people tell me automatically, well, the county will never let you have that. I'm not interested in the county. I'm interested in collaborating with people who are in medical centers who will work with me, get an IRB approved retrospective study, and let's figure out if we could have predicted who was likely to die. And so those
Hmm.
data as well, if we find out things like, yeah, you know what, guys, we could have predicted who was likely to die, then it makes it less of an emergency because then we can handle it better.
Well, I think the problem is that if you look at year over year mortality, it doesn't seem like there was anything going on anyplace different than last year. It's a matter of how you categorize your deaths. In other words, if the flu and pneumonia disappeared, I don't think that's likely actually, but all those just became COVID deaths, then nothing. It might have actually been a more mild flu season because the death certificates. I'm sure you're familiar with that document, and I can't remember the alphabet soup. There's an alphabet soup of federal agencies. It's not well, whatever one it was. They said that we're going to fill out the death certificates differently than any other disease since 2003. And the language actually says so as to diagnose people with dying with COVID more often than not. And that was
That
the
that
famous
that
scarf lady.
That's right.
Um,
So Dr.
uh,
Henry Ely published his paper in my journal, Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law, when that was a peer-reviewed
yeah.
report that nailed them for that. The
Yeah,
all-cause
so we
mortality
don't
might
know
not
really
differ.
who died of it. We
I'm
don't
sorry, go
really know
ahead.
who died of it. And so we don't really know who died of COVID-19. We may never actually know because
No,
it would take forever to
that's the
go
point.
back through all these.
What I'm saying is, given my expertise in data analysis and what I can do in teasing things apart, I mean, there's a lot
Hmm.
that I can do. So
Hmm.
my point is, yes, for all cause mortality, it's flat. For respiratory virus, for respiratory illnesses that are reported as deaths from respiratory illnesses, there's no doubt that it's up. But we also have data. We need data on cardiovascular diseases. See what we could do is
Hmm.
deconvolve the expected signatures of all the other causes of deaths
Hmm.
out of that
Yeah.
and say this is what the expected rates are from these other causes that were not reported, because there's no net change in all cause mortality. Now it might be different in the elderly because well, at the end, when they brought out the vaccine, we're very much interested in looking to see if there is anything to this idea that there might be excess deaths and that like the some Israeli data allegedly is showing. So
Hmm.
we'll be able to get there. There's no problem. I've already done some of this analysis, and we can already say that it's possible that there's more respiratory virus deaths that were not COVID-19 because they didn't get the right treatment than there were
Hmm.
potentially from COVID-19. That's the worst case scenario. So
Right.
we'll get there. I just want to put a call out and so that what kind of data are you expecting that there's going to be swords crossed in the courtroom over between the lawyers?
I think, well, the first thing is the PCR test itself, because the inventor said it should never be used for diagnostic purposes. And the one time it was actually published in the New York Times. The data or the results of it, that was at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, and they thought they were having a whooping cough outbreak, so they used PCR testing, and it had 0% efficacy. It failed to predict any case of whooping cough. So we certainly had a problem there that we knew that there was a problem. I think the biggest liability they have, aside from the stuff I can't talk about, is the fact that they were instructing the PCR to be run at 40 cycles. There are some handbooks that actually set up to 45 cycles. And there's a very famous video that we've downloaded to our server, of course, of Mr. Fauci saying to a virology conference last summer, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but not much. He said, when you run that test at 35 cycles or more, you get a bunch of dead nucleotides and garbage. It's all false positives. So, as the architect of this whole thing, as the person driving this whole thing, it would be impossible to think that he didn't know that the PCR test was being run at 40 all over the world, and certainly in the United States. So what he basically said is that we have an epidemic of fake cases. That's what scares everybody, is that daily how many cases, how many cases.
Yeah.
So I think that we probably will find that we'll never know who had it. I mean, how can you go back and retest all these millions of people that were falsely diagnosed with, because just by virtue of the cycles, right? So you throw all that out, and then you try to sort through the death certificates to see who actually died of what. And even with the elderly, it's going to be difficult to determine because of the way the elderly were treated. Something that has appeared on more death certificates than ever before for elderly people is failure to thrive. This is where an older person says, I hate living in a room by myself so much, I'm just not going to eat. People reported this all over the place. Like my mother, people would say my mom was fine when we put her in this institution. As soon as we were unable to see her, we watched her decline until she died. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Canada, you can do assisted suicide. And the new thing in Canada is people in nursing homes locked up are choosing to kill themselves instead of remain locked up without family. So even and I want to bring up something because I think this is very important. People keep talking about what we should have done with the elderly. And here's every flu season, and I think it's important to insert this. Every flu season, the most vulnerable people are elderly people who are in nursing homes and care homes, and people who are immunocompromised. You're getting chemotherapy for your cancer or something like that, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's first of all look at this is just a dose of reality. And I want to say, to qualify my statement, anytime somebody dies, it's somebody's family member or friend, it's tragic for those people, right? So I don't want to be cavalier about deaths. But the reality is, if you're 85 years old and you're taking 7 medications and you can't get out of bed and you're in a nursing home, and it's January of 2021, you are probably not going to live till the end of the year. Now, something's going to happen, and it just might be the flu, all right? Now, my point in bringing this up is that if you had suggested that every year for several months, you're going to take older people to protect them from the flu, you're going to cut them off from all family and friends, you're going to put them in a room, deliver 3 meals a day, and they have no human companionship. I mean, people would have been pulling their family members out of these places in droves because it's cruel and unusual punishment. Everybody would have said that, right? So there's no way to protect the elderly unless they should be given a say. My gosh, when I'm 85 years old, provided I'm somewhat mentally sound, I want to decide what's going on. I don't want to be protected from getting the flu if it means I don't see anybody ever again, you know? And I don't think any of these elderly people, given the choice, would have said, listen, I'm so afraid of the flu that I'm willing to never hug my grandchildren again. That's fine. That's a great trade-off, right? So what we did to the elderly, how would you actually protect the elderly against the flu? There's no way to do it humanely. So we've lost sight of the fact that there is risk involved in living. And adults get to choose the type of risk that they want to take. People like skydiving. I don't want to do it. It's too risky for me. But I'm not trying to pass any laws. I'm not trying to intervene with other people who want to go skydiving, right? So this whole business of somehow we're going to come up with some scheme for risk-free living, this whole business of risk was invented by these criminals to scare people. They scared people into thinking that the flu is such high risk that we have to do all this stuff. And really what it was just I mean, it's false fright is what it was. It's like screaming fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. And you can go to jail for that. And the people who did this are going to go to jail for what they did if it takes me the rest of my life to do it.
Well, you're the right person to lead that charge, Pam. I'm happy to add fuel to the fire. In my ability to tease the data apart, one of the things that I want to look at is how many of these older people were given the flu shot um, and then
Hmm.
died of COVID-19 because 60% of the flu shots contain thimerosal, and thimerosal inhibits a protein ERAP1. ERAP1 is necessary for folding the antigens and antigen presenting cells. And so it's known, Ben Collings' study out of Hong Kong, that you're more susceptible to get other respiratory virus illnesses if you get the flu shot. Now, COVID was not significant, but who knows if getting thimerosal is a good idea when you're over 85, and you might have a
Right.
respiratory illness. So here's the argument on the data would go as follows. We have basically a group of people who died of a particular age. We know the past year's percentage or numbers, what that should look like, the expected values. And we know the expected values for the last 10 years of all the causes of death. And then we have the missingness, the cardiovascular, the misattribution of death is a real thing. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
that's what I'd like to get into, or that's what we are getting into. Actually, I have a decision theoretical approach to that. So if that's useful in what you're doing, I'd be more than happy to share that as it comes out when it's published. I'll be published. But what I'm desperately need is I need data, week to week deaths at the county level, at the state level, in the elderly over this time period, over the past year, ideally, um, broken down by decade. So Pam, let's move to your book a little bit here. I've written books. The number one question I have for authors who write a factual book, this is not fictional, it's nonfiction. What surprised you going into it? Every book is a journey. You were fully
Hmm.
aware of how bad was, but what is the number one thing that sticks out in your mind that you didn't know going into writing the book? What did you learn?
Well, first of all, how much worse bad was. I um I think that for a long time I had been aware of Bill Gates and his bad actions. I didn't really realize what he had done. The chapter you referred to, the global cabal for vaccines. If you look at this Byzantine web of influence that he's set up, it's so huge that I think it was Newsweek magazine that might have done the cover story. Meet the world's most famous doctor, Bill Gates. That
Mhm.
should chill up your spine, right? And when I looked into his background, this is another thing too. When I looked into his background as well as some of the other players involved in this, I was shocked at what I found because the story that we've all been told is, young Bill was a prodigy and genius and playing around with computers and came out of nowhere and became a self-made billionaire. That's just not what happened. He came from a family that was hung out with eugenicists. And I started looking into the Rockefeller Foundation, by the way, and found out that they had been involved in eugenics experiments with the Nazis and published their data in medical journals. And that's another thing too, is how easy it is to find out what these people did because they were proud of their bad acts. I mean, the people who were doing genetic engineering with bat viruses at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Wuhan, they published an article in Nature Medicine and said, yeah, here's the sequence for the thing we invented that is transmissible from human to human.
Yeah.
Maybe this wasn't a good idea, but we're so proud of ourselves, we thought we'd publish it in a medical journal. So the how upfront and public they were willing to make some of their bad actions was kind of shocking to me too. I guess the ease with which I was able to dig up what really happened, it was just all in plain sight.
Yeah.
I think was kind of shocking to me how bad they were and how easy it was to find out how bad they were.
Yeah, yeah. So that anybody that wasn't following closely, this is like I mentioned, a fact-filled, very extremely well referenced book. There's
Thank you.
references at the end of at all of the chapters. Um, you got a kitty cat
That's
there.
my cat.
He wants to join in.
He's he was like, I'm home, and so he knows a lot about this. By the way, helped to write the book. He's very familiar with everything, so he often weighs in with his own cat-like opinion about what's
My, my,
happening
my,
here.
my cat got so tired of me talking about COVID and vaccines, he left. So left me. That's it. Talk about birds or something else. But what I want to also emphasize is that you have a message at the end of the book, and you've been
Yeah.
consistent about your message for the people that have been paying attention to what you're doing. So you want people to get off their duff and help themselves, right? Your
Yes.
message is people like me and you, we're doing all that we can do. Yes, we're willing to help out a little bit, but don't come to us and say, we hope that you take care of this for us. Rather,
Hmm.
you would want them to say, could you help me figure out how to do this? That's really what people
Right.
should be doing. You own this too.
That's a very good point. It's real important because I look back on the decades that there have been so people who have invested their life savings and their life's effort and work. You have in trying to overcome the terrible things that government and its business partners, the drug companies and the medical cartels want, what they want to do to people. And I think part of the problem is that there were many, many people who saw that there was a problem, and they thought that, gosh, if I sign up for this to belong to this group, and I give them my name and email address and send them $25 every year, got it covered. And I'm not criticizing those people. We never really gave them something to do. But what I've been clear about at Make Americans Free Again is this really has to be an uprising of people, and everybody has to work at it. Like a dozen people in Ohio can't solve this for you, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to start a Thursday group. And it's funny, every Thursday at noon, I do a conference call to show people how to get started, to build Thursday groups, to get to the place where they can finance a lawsuit like ours. And we want to help in every state, right? And there's always two or three people who say, well, can you tell me, like, I'm in Connecticut or I'm in Montana, maybe I could give you my zip code and you can tell me um, where some people are that I can go hang out with on Thursday night. My answer is always the same. Listen, this is not going to work for me to be your social director. All right. You have to start a Thursday group. You have to start inviting people to come to your living room
Yeah.
and organize with us. Everybody has to do it. So that's the only way that this problem will get solved. And when people are resistant to doing that, I say, well, take a look around. And if you like the world the way that it is today, stay passive. But if you don't like the way the world is right now, then you have to do your part to help. And so we've tried to give people things that everybody can do. I have deliberately, like with my own Thursday group and with the Thursday groups around Ohio. I mean, I show up every Thursday. I love it, right? I love our Thursday group, and I'll certainly show up for events and buy tickets. I do all that stuff, but I make sure that I'm not the issue. Like if I didn't come tonight to the group, if I didn't go, they would still have a great meeting. Everything would be fine. They're making plans for a fundraiser next Saturday. It would still all happen. So this is stuff everybody can do. You don't have to have special skills. So I think it's very important that everybody get involved. And I've heard about grassroots since my whole adult life, and I've never really seen it the way it needs to be seen, where everybody's on board. Citizens in charge means citizens engaged, all of us together doing stuff, right? And I think that's what's going to make a difference in the long term.
I agree. The American Revolution was actually plotted in that was a conspiracy, and it was plotted in the taverns around New
Mm-hmm.
England, and in the
Yeah.
living rooms. And the men would get together and get drunk and talk about how evil it was, and then they'd go home and their wives would tell them how to do it. I'm convinced that that's that's exactly how.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I liken this to World War II because people say, well, social media censors and they do. But you know what? Think about the resistance during World War II. And I use a lot of analogies because I'm a World War II buff. But think about during World War II, there was no social media, and you couldn't like put a sign up in downtown Amsterdam and say, hey, we're taking 400 children out of the Netherlands today. So meet everybody at Broad High at midnight. We'll pack them in cars and drive to the border, right? So
that's right.
somehow, with all this underground communication, one person to another person, they managed to coordinate this incredible effort, and they infuriated Hitler. I mean, he was never-ending anger about how in every country there was stuff going on. He couldn't figure out how it was going on, right? So that's kind of like this. It's one person to another person. You can't leave flyers on cars and post something on Facebook. That's not the way this happens. So it's connecting people in a different sort of way. I mean, when I post something on Facebook or I post something on YouTube, I have 100 and some thousand followers. I've got another 250,000 that get direct subscribed through my own server, right?
Right.
So yeah, I reach a lot of people. That's great because I'm distributing information. But you know what? In a community setting, I need to be in the same room with a group of humans who are concerned about what's going on a mile from here,
Yep.
right? That's a different kind of connection.
Yeah.
And that's the connection we all need to make across America right now.
Yeah, it really is. When I was traveling around state to state helping people out in person, I learned pretty quickly that I really didn't have to worry about having a roof over my head because as long as there were social issues, I would just travel the country and sleep on everybody's couch. It, I don't need to be
Yeah.
put up in a hotel room. I'm like your brother. So Pam, there's another message that you have, rather than just make sure that you get yourself active. There are people who are really truly suffering right now
Hmm.
because of the reaction to COVID-19. And you have a very strong come together um, message. You alluded to it at the beginning of what your organization does. There, when you see a business that's struggling, when you see a family that's hurting, this is how, it used to happen in churches. The churches would collect money, and the priest would quietly give money
Hmm.
to the starving people in the congregation, and nobody knew who got it.
Yeah.
But we don't have that anymore, really. I mean, for most Americans who are not going to the same congregation, they're not going to learn about in our network who's suffering the most. So you've got a very strong message about you that we are supposed to look after our brothers and sisters,
Right.
and I very
Right.
deeply appreciate that. And helping them out when times are hard is a beautiful thing. So thank you for that. It's very
Well, you're welcome.
inspirational
And
to
the
me.
government's not going to fix this. I mean, what are they going to do? Send another $600? Boy, that'll take care of a family of four and a closed business for a real long time. I mean, their solutions are a joke. And so we have to take care of that. And we started with we have a big homeschool resource center on our Make Americans Free Again website, for people. And 30% of children have been withdrawn from public school, which is a great thing. And the hopeful message out of this is that we've been talking about education reform. Have you seen any education reform? I haven't, right? Well, blow up the system, we might get some reform. And with 30% of the kids out of school, they're going to be unemployed teachers and empty school buildings, and this will force some reform. We've been talking about medical reform. 25% of healthcare workers are unemployed right now. That's how much support and patronage has been withdrawn from the medical system. It's a good thing. We've blown up the criminals in their own ineptitude because they think they're so smart and so powerful. They're rich and they're powerful, but they're not as smart as they think they are. So they're blowing up systems that could not be reformed unless they were blown up. So it's going to backfire on them. And I really believe this. In another 10 years, we're going to say that was a god awful period of time, but we ended up in a place that we could never have gotten to had it not gone this way. All right. And so I'm kind of excited about the potential for a reimagining education in a different way where
I'm glad
parents
you
are in
brought that
charge
up.
and reimagining medical system.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're actually doing that IPAC EDU right here. Imagine if you want to learn about things that you would learn in college, but you're not going to put 4 years into a college degree. So you can
Right.
come and take college
That's
level
wonderful.
courses from qualified experts, like myself and others, who will teach you psychology. Shannon Kroner, for
Hmm.
instance, has a course, open enrollment right now. Come and learn psychology. I teach courses on analytics, how to work with numbers. I teach courses
Hmm.
in biology. We just finished the immunology lecture. So there's a whole 35 or 40 people that understand immunology well enough to go and read articles about them. We have courses on how to read and interpret a scientific study. So my goal,
Hmm.
what I realized, Pam, was that, yeah, I'm not with the university anymore. The entire world is my university, and that is
Hmm.
a revolution. That
And
is,
it's exciting. It's
yeah,
exciting. Yeah.
it
So the
truly
world's
is.
going to be a different place. They keep talking about this great reset. There's going to be a great reset. It's just not the one they imagined. And
That's good.
like a lot, I always look at vulnerabilities. I've fought with some pretty big bad people and institutions in my life, and I look at vulnerabilities. And I think a key vulnerability. Hey, Schroeder, you want to come over here and join us? A key vulnerability, I think, is when you're trying to pull off something this huge. You gotta keep a lot of moving parts moving in the same direction. I think that they underestimated the difficulty in doing this, and they also underestimated the lack of participation from a Kristi Noem in South Dakota or the president of Sweden, that sort of thing. But the other thing is they didn't really have a clean exit plan.
Right.
Have you noticed that the way that this is ending is a combination of revolt and exhaustion, tired of this crap. I think the governor of Texas was just tired of this crap. The governor of Alabama said 100 and some thousand people will be in the football stadium in the fall. Okay, so you've got the head of the CDC who's kind of standing rather impotent in Washington, D.C., going, that's a bad idea. And they're going, yeah, okay, so we're doing it anyway, right? So it's sort of unraveling in this very disorganized way without a clear exit plan. So we can take advantage of their vulnerabilities and win the lawsuits, but also rebuild in a way that makes our communities stronger. And they sure did not see that coming. This was all designed to weaken us, and they did for a while. I mean, we were all shell shocked and all that sort of thing, but they're not winning that game anymore. And the number of people who are blindly following, I think, goes down every week.
I agree. We have to make sure also that it never happens again, and
Yes.
keeping our eye on the ball means I'm going to continue to publish the studies I'm publishing that shows how off the mark the CDC numbers were. For instance,
Yes.
we can
Yes.
absolutely do this, but at the same time, hand the world a I'm going to hand the world a computational solution that if a real outbreak happens, if a real pandemic happens, here's how you go about optimizing your diagnostics, right? So
Yes.
it's more than just critiquing. We're not just here, throwing rotten eggs and tomatoes at the bad guys. We have to build the replacement system. That's Plan B. So everybody look up hashtag Plan B with my name on it. If you're not part of building your next future, the new normal, you're going to be subject to whatever normal they give us. And I'm not going to take this again, and neither are you.
Right.
So,
But we also have to criminally prosecute because we have to disincentivize this kind of behavior, and I think for too long everybody's watched people who are powerful get away with things that we know are wrong. And I've had conversations with my own friends and said we've said, look, if we did that, oh my gosh, they would have been here in 37 seconds to arrest us. And then you watch these important people who are powerful get away with it. I think that it's important that that come to an end. And there are two ways to disincentivize it. One is we get laws passed that change the definition or court decisions. I think we need to know what is an emergency, who can declare one, for how long, and without and before oversight sets in, and who is and what is the oversight. So I've used this example in some of our discussions with people. What's to prevent the next person who takes Mr. Fauci's job once we get him arrested from saying in 2 years, I think that there's a real crisis with people having car accidents and roadside fatalities. So we're going to take all the vehicles off the road
yeah,
until we figure this out. Well, we'll all starve to death because the food supply depends upon trucks and the using the roadway, right? Well, that's people say, well, that's an extreme example. It's no more bizarre than what's going on now, and there's nothing to stop that from happening, really. And so we've got to put some safeguards in place. And then people who did this have got to pay for what they did. And then that the next governor, when we actually do get another governor, because we don't have a governor in Ohio, we have an emperor. He declared himself the emperor. The next one will maybe think twice about engaging in criminal behavior.
well, those are good points. I actually made the counterexample in the restaurant case in LA County in my expert statement there that I projected how many people would die if all the restaurants were open for 14 hours a day, allowing people to eat outdoors. In the entire county, in 12 months, I projected there would be two more deaths due to COVID
Mm-hmm.
19, right? Two more deaths. But during the same period of time, 450 people would die from choking or from food poisoning, choking on food or food poisoning. And so we really should just ban eating. It's too
Eating.
so
I was going to say,
the relative
we've
risk of
missed our
death
chance.
the relative risk of
Yeah.
death from eating under those circumstances was, 200 times greater than the risk of dying from COVID. So let's ban eating. And effectually, that's what a lockdown does. It stops people from being able to have an income in feeding their children. It's
Right.
unfathomable that the governor of this state in Pennsylvania actually had a spreadsheet and a list and said, these people get to work because they're essential, and these people don't have to get to work because their jobs are not essential. Did he forget that they have kids? That they have to feed? And there's no plan whatsoever to help them out. The businesses that were shut down and all the rest. So I agree with you that there has to be consequences when we build the
Mm-hmm.
future. If you haven't read the Plan B, I'll send you the manuscript. It we do need to figure out what the most important causes of death are and what the most important causes of morbidity are. And it's going to turn out to be things like allopathy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I want to build a system that can tell our elected officials, this is what's making people sick. And if it's thimerosal, it's thimerosal. We don't need somebody that's blocking the reality and trying to
Hmm.
constantly massage that reality and give propaganda about the safety of these chemicals and so on. This Plan B, it is a totally feasible program that no one can profit from it. If you
Hmm.
caught profiting from it with a pharmaceutical company, you're actually that node is cut off of the network, and all they do is they report to the Senate committees about what's happening, and the Senate committees end up reporting to the Senate Intelligence Committee, who then informs the president and informs the vice president. These are what the priorities are. They don't ask. They don't ask if they agree. Nothing like that at all, because then it depoliticizes it. So this completely decentralizes public health. It'll put public health subservient to society. And I'm going to say
Hmm.
I was interviewed by Kim Monson out in Colorado, and she asked me. She said, "Do you think what's going on here is some kind of government takeover?" And I said, "Yes, it's actually a shadow government called public health.
Hmm.
There's 16,000 people in this army, and there's more thousands every year that graduate from these programs. They have a top-down dictatorial type structure, and they rule by edict, and they're not elected. They're appointed, and they serve for the rest of their lives. Look at Fauci.
Hmm.
Fauci makes $600,000 a year. He's the highest paid person in the United States government, higher than the
Right.
president of the United States. So we do have to have a reset. And I'm glad that you brought that up as a contrast. I just want to flash this before we go. You could go to any of your independent booksellers to find COVID Operation by Pam Popper and Shane Pryor. I strongly recommend it. I'm going to make an ad for it and put it on my blog at jameslyons-weiler.com
Thank
so
you.
you can click through it. And Pam, thanks so much for being on Unbreaking Science, and thanks for being who you are. You're a great person.
Well, thank you. And so are you. I've appreciated your work and I really enjoyed the conference that we shared together a few weeks ago. That was just a wonderful weekend and I learned so much. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do. I'm glad I'm going to be doing some of it with you.
Absolutely. We're going to be really nailing it. The 161 vaccine risk aware, well educated, informed citizens got together and nobody died. Imagine that. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.